For eons, humanity's war machines have been crucial to their success on countless battlefields throughout the galaxy. Even before the dark age of technology, tracked siege engines and armored vehicles have allowed mankind to spearhead their expanse and domination on planet after planet. Each new design brings with it a new method of pacifying or destroying the enemy. The most successful are mass-produced and eventually improved or customized for different theaters of war. Some of these variances create truly strange war engines because of their tailor-made designs. As they become staple parts of the planet or subsector's arsenal, they are given personalized names and unique variations, almost as if the engines of war were living, breathing soldiers. But as the need on a battlefield changes and new designs are created, the old designs are forgotten or eventually cease to make it out of the assembly lines. Thus, the once primary war machines are now sitting idly in a storehouse, waiting to be rediscovered by their former masters. Nothing is wrong with these older models, they simply have been abandoned. This has been the case for countless Imperial tanks and war engines from the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy era. And with that said, I want to welcome you guys back to another 40 Facts about the 40K universe. I am your host Gershwan, and today we're going to be talking about the various engines of war of the 30K era. If you guys are new to the channel, we post Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day, so subscribe to the channel if you guys want to see that. If you guys have suggestions or questions about the 40K universe, ask in the comment section below and I'll create a video for you guys, or I'll answer there. And if you guys enjoy our content, consider sharing with your friends or support us on Patreon. The link is in the description, it's just $1 a month. But with all of that said, let's get into 40 facts on the engines of war of the 30K era. The armies of the Imperium of Man during this era had a wider variety of readily available heavy tanks and siege engines than what we see in the current millennium. Many of them predate the Imperium of Man's inception and have seen battle on some of humanity's most important military campaigns, such as the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy. Like most of the war engines of that time, the Imperium has sporadically rediscovered these ancient patterns throughout history. One of the strangest and rarest is the Minotaur self-propelled artillery piece. The Minotaur is a unique example of a potential original design of a future heavy tank that became more popular than its predecessor. The Minotaur uses the same chassis as the popular Macarius heavy battle tank, but unlike the Macarius and many of its variances, the Minotaur weapon is mounted backwards, facing away from the crew's compartment. The vehicle's backward design allows it to be easily driven into dugouts or emplacements, even using destroyed buildings or piles of rubble as cover. When it needs to move backwards again, it simply drives out forward through the same path that it had made for itself. The Minotaur's deck layout is also very unusual, as everything from the engine and the driving system to the weapon and ammunition storage is spaced out evenly over the entire superstructure. The primary weapon system, a massive twin-linked Earthshaker cannon, is housed in a wide centralized access point and features a complex hydraulic recoil suppression system. The centralized position of the weapon system allows the artillery piece to remain stable when firing its weapon, even when positioned on difficult terrain. The weapon's location allows ample room for storage of large number of shells, which are kept on the sides of the weapon in the armored storage lockers to protect them from enemy fire. The weapon is capable of laying down heavy barrages and accurate, though indirect fire, even when under heavy enemy assault. The Minotaur is not armed with any other weapon, but can be upgraded with a heavy stubbard or a storm bolter. The vehicle can also accept an enclosed crew compartment, extra armor plating, a hunter-killer missile, a dozen blades, a searchlight, and a smoke launcher. Many Imperial records point to the Minotaur being widely used by the forces of the Imperial Army during the Great Crusade, but there are some that believe that the design was rediscovered during that era, making its reintroduction into the 42nd millennium a second rediscovery. There are frescoes adorning the walls of the Templis Nemesis on Terra that depict a war machine that resembles the Minotaur fighting during the Great Crusade, but the vehicle's age and complexity may be evidence that it's even older. During the current millennium, the Minotaur is a rare relic of war that very few will ever see. The number of Forge Worlds capable of producing them has dropped steadily over the millennia. With the steady replacement of the vehicle by the Basilisk, the Minotaur may soon become just another casualty of war. Although it is rumored that the Minotaur is stockpiled by the thousands inside the Departo Minitorum storehouses, only specialized siege companies of the Imperial Guard will ever get to deploy their awesome firepower. This backfired during the Siege of Vrax. The Minotaur was uncovered by the Vraxian trader militia in the deep storage facilities of the armored world of Vrax Prime. The traders did deploy them late in the conflict. The Departo Minitorum believed that there were at least 100 Minotaurs stored in Vrax Prime, and after the war was over, following the Imperial victory, the remaining Minotaurs were turned over to the Adeptus Mechanicus to be reconsecrated back into the service of the Emperor of Mankind. Another relic of the 30K era that participated in the Siege of Vrax was the Valdor Tank Hunter. This heavy tank was purposefully made to destroy other tanks. It was named after the legendary Legal Custodes commander Constantine Valdor. This engine of war was only entering the service of the Imperial Army in limited numbers, and on a trial basis when the Horus Heresy finally began. Initial production runs were channeled to the elite Solo Auxilia, in particular those cohorts operating against foes equipped with heavy tanks, or in the case of the many Xeno enemies still infesting the stars, their tank equivalent. While utilizing a familiar chassis on which several of the other armored vehicles in the arsenal of the Solo Auxilia were based, the Valdor mounted a devastating neutron laser. This weapon was developed during the Dark Age of technology. It takes up most of the room inside the tank, and the shielding for it requires pyro generators that are extremely thin, so any major damage caused by the enemy attack would cause disastrous consequences for the crew. If the weapon failed to transfer all of its energy into its target while firing, it could lead to a powerful feedback reaction that could damage the weapon. All of these drawbacks were worth it, as this weapon was one of the most powerful that could be mounted on a tank. The neutron energy beam that it emitted was capable of rupturing enemy armor on a molecular level, often resulting in the target vehicle being vaporized in a massive explosion. Even if the target is not destroyed outright by the initial beam, the neutron energy of the attack will overwhelm and disable the targeted vehicle's electronics with a storm of electromagnetic radiation. While the Valdor Tank Hunter was not yet in common use, Imperial war scholars had projected that its service was likely to be required in ever greater numbers, especially when the loyalist Solar Auxilia were called upon to fight the traitorous Legionis Astartes. Ancient records found on the planet of Mordian show that the Valdor Tank Hunter was most widely used during the Great Scouring, after the Heresy, when the Imperium had led the great counterattack against the traitorous legions, driving them back to the Eye of Terror. In the current millennium, this tank is considered an ancient relic, with only a few number of Forge Worlds able to maintain it, let alone construct a Valdor. As a result, they are rarely deployed amongst the Imperial Guard's armored regiments. Even the 1st Cadian Armored Regiment, which helped to defend the Imperial Fortress world of Cadia, possesses only a total of 5 Valdor tanks. During the Siege of Vrax, the 88th Siege Army's intelligence officers believed that there was no more than 30 Valdor tanks stored inside of Vrax's Prime's vast Departo Munitorum storehouses, and these tanks were not utilized by the Vraxian traitor militia until much later in the terrible grinding conflict. It is believed that the Dark Magos of the Dark Mechanicus arrived on the planet with the Steel Brother and Chaos Space Marine and helped the Renegades to activate and deploy the Valdor tanks in the service of Chaos. The payment to the Dark Mechanicus for this aid was the provision of a complement of several fully functioning Valdor tanks, and what is believed to be a data core detailing how to construct the Valdor. This means that there is a dreadful possibility that the Valdor Tank Hunter may start appearing in the armies of the Forces of Chaos in the near future. Sometime during the middle of the 41st millennium, a Magos from the Forge World of Lucius, known as Nalax, discovered the partial data remnants of a long-forgotten battle tank that was used during the Great Crusade. After many years of diligent study and cross-examination of ancient documents recovered deep within the archives of Lucius, Nalax was able to gather enough of the data to construct the Macarius heavy tank. The tank was named after Lord Solar Macarius, the great imperial general who led the Macarian Crusade and liberated 1,000 worlds in the name of the Emperor of Mankind. Nalax made the journey to Mars and spoke with the High Fabricator General for approval to begin manufacturing the Macarius. The process of approval took nearly 200 Terran years. After long testing and consultations with many Forge Worlds, Lucius was finally sanctioned to start production by the Mechanicus. Unfortunately, Nalax himself did not live to see the outcome. To make matters worse, in the time it took for the plans of the tank's construction to be approved, the Forge World had also lobbied for and been given the right to build the more sought-after Bane Blades, and it seemed that Nalax's life's work had been wasted. But soon after the Forge World started its production of the Bane Blades, it found that the demand far exceeded supply, and that the planet's manufactorums were having trouble keeping up with the requirements of the Departamento Minitorum. At the same time, the 500-year-long Krieg Civil War came to an end, with a faction loyal to the Imperium victorious, and the world soon offered up many new regiments for the Imperial Guard. The Departamento Munitorum looked to the Forge World of Lucius to provide much of the equipments needed for this new regiment, known as the Death Corps of Krieg. This sudden and unexpected increase in demand meant that the Forge World would need to look to alternatives to the Bane Blade, It was then that the Forge World turned to the Macarius heavy tank. The first Macarius tank from Lucius rolled off from the production lines and were shipped off to Krieg. This began the Death Corps of Krieg's association with the Macarius tank, although by this time Mars had given the design to various other Forge Worlds, and they were in use by other Imperial Guard regiments as well. Although the 174-ton Macarius lacked the massive size and multitude of weapons that the Baneblade had, the tank was still capable of fulfilling the same battlefield role. To this day, the standard and most common armaments for the Macarius is a turret-mounted twin-linked battle cannon, a hull-mounted twin-linked heavy stubber, and a sponson-mounted heavy bolter on each side. There are other less common variants of the Macarius, such as the Macarius Vanquisher, that is armed with twin-linked Vanquisher cannons as its main weapon, and another variant pattern called the Macarius Vulcan, which has a Vulcan Mega Bolter as the main turret weapon. The Macarius Vanquisher is rare because of its unique Vanquisher cannons, which almost disappeared from Imperial records due to the actions of the Orc warlord, Argod the Defiler, who scoured the Forge World of Tigris in the 35th millennium, destroying the standard template construct for the construction of the Vanquisher cannon. Since that loss, efforts have been made to reproduce more Vanquisher cannons on other Forge Worlds with only mixed success. The Forge World of Trebor 1, Gryphone 4, and Styges 8 have enjoyed the most success and are now capable of producing Vanquisher cannons in limited quantities. Other Forge Worlds continue their efforts, though it is a slow and complex process. The Macarius Vulcan is extremely rare because its weapon was designed for a Titan. It was actually on the Forge World of Lucius where the first experiments with mounting the Vulcan Mega Bolter onto tanks happened. Many of the machine spirits reacted badly to these efforts, and failed rituals led to the destruction of many tanks before relatively stable patterns were developed. As servitors mounted this weapon onto the Macarius, engine seers poured sacred oils over the cogs to placate the volatile machine spirit into accepting the modifications. Even after the components and rituals come together, and the violent machine successfully comes to life, it takes a particularly brave or wild crew to risk driving this vehicle into battle. The Death Corps of Krieg fielded many Macarius tanks during the 17-year-long Siege of Vrax, where they blunted the enemy armored thrust, due in no small part to days of multiple delaying actions done by the valiant Krieg tank commanders. Unfortunately, it was during this same campaign that the Vextrayan traitor militia captured Macarius tanks for their own use. The Macarius heavy tanks were also used by the Death Corps of Krieg during the Das campaign, where they participated in the eradication of Nurgle-aligned mutant army. The Macarius heavy tanks were also used by the Death Corps of Krieg during the Das campaign, where they participated in the eradication of the Nurgle-aligned mutant armies of the world of Dask in the Segmentum Tempestus. Various tank commander squadrons were used as line breakers at the head of an overwhelming infantry offensive. It was during one of these strategic battlefield maneuvers, followed by a gruesome war of attrition, that would see the glorious death of Colonel 186, as he charged at the front of 400 men to retake a strategic hill. Although a success, the tank squadrons were severely depleted by the time their transports, the Memento Mori, arrived to ship them to another war zone. While it is unclear, this entire heavy tank regiment might have been entirely destroyed while counterattacking Necron phalanxes during the Orphean War. The regiment's brave sacrifice during the Battle of the Outhall Depression allowed for the Imperial forces to encircle and defeat the Necron advance, the regiment's tanks even having to break formation and charge into the Necron phalanxes to avoid aerial assaults. Many tank crews detonating their fuel and ammunition reserves in a last act of spite against the Necrons. The Mastodon Heavy Assault Transport, or simply the Mastodon, is a super heavy assault transport that was utilized by the Legion of Astartes during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy eras. The primary combat role of the Mastodon was the safe delivery of its Astartes passengers directly into the enemy defenses, and usually used to breach fortified walls or structures using its forward-firing siege melta array and heavy armored prow. The Mastodon's forward siege melta array could create a breach through even the thickest of enemy walls. Few fortifications could withstand this fearsome weapon. Once the Mastodon creates a breach, powerful interior servos fire the assault doors open, smashing aside debris and unfortunate enemies, and allowing the Space Marines within to press directly into the heart of the enemy's position. Once the Space Marines begin to cross through the breach, the rear ramp lowers, allowing more squads to funnel through the Mastodon and into the enemy stronghold, all the while being protected by the Mastodon's heavy armor and weaponry, as the Mastodon itself acts as an armored breach tunnel. The interior and exterior of the Mastodon is heavily armored, with an armored shell acting the interior tunnel portion of the vehicle, and armored ceramite plating protecting the exterior from enemy fire. The inside is subsidized into different sections with armored bulkheads that protect the different areas from fire and damage, opening to allow infantry to progress through. The vehicle's upper deck is where the driver and crew are stationed, with hatches and portholes allowing officers to direct the battle around them. The entire vehicle can be sealed close in case the enemy makes use of chemical or viral weaponry. The reinforced interior shell and thick exterior armor can protect the vehicle so well that even when suffering from catastrophic damage, the vehicle may simply be reduced to a nearly indestructible wreck of twisted metal, acting as a small bunker that can protect those who need shelter from the storm of battle outside. The Mastodon was as heavily armed as it was armored, with a wide variety of weapons and technology. It was fully capable of defending itself and its cargo from attack. Aside from the siege melta array, an array of 9 melta weapons that was used to burn through enemy walls and fortifications, the secondary weapons of the Mastodon included a turret-mounted Sky Reaper battery for protection from enemy flyers, 2 sponson-mounted heavy flamers, and 2 sponson-mounted las cannons. The Mastodon commonly came outfitted with smoke launchers, a searchlight, and armored ceramite plating, and can also be equipped with up to 4 hunter-killer missile launchers. And finally, the Mastodon was also equipped with 2 void shield generators, providing even more protection from enemy fire. The Malcador Infernus is a variant of the venerable Malcador Assault Tank. The Malcador Assault Tank is a truly ancient design dating back to the wars of the Age of Strife on Terra. During the Great Crusade, thousands of these war machines rolled off the production lines of both Mars and Voss. Though not as heavily armed or armored as the Baneblade or Land Raider, the Malcador nevertheless possessed a number of advantages to its design, the principal of which was its battle speed and versatility. Soon, the Malcador had several variant patterns being utilized by the military forces of the new Imperium. One of these patterns was the Malcador Infernus. The Infernus is a heavy flamethrower tank, in effect a huge flamer on tracks, with a fuel trailer towed behind it. Within the trailer, the promethium fuel is stored as separate chemicals. These are mixed together in a chamber just behind the barrel to create a jelly that is projected out, ignited as it does so, and which sticks to any surface. The massive gout of flames launched from the Inferno gun is also effective at clearing mines, the sudden heat detonating mine fuses, and making large areas safe much quicker than alternative methods. Unfortunately for the Infernus crew, carrying a large amount of flammable fuel through the trailer makes the vehicle a tempting target for the enemy, and the destruction of a fuel trailer can result in a large, fiery explosion. Some Infernus tank crews will use corrosive chemicals as their ammunition instead of promethium, turning the Malcador Infernus into a deadly chemical weapon delivery vehicle. This vehicle is also armed with 2 sponson-mounted weapons, 1 on each side. These weapons can be either a heavy stubbard, heavy flamer, heavy bolter, las cannon, or autocannon. The Malcador Infernus was also outfitted with a variety of upgrades and attachments, such as camouflage netting, extra armor plating, an improved communication system, a hunter-killer missile launcher, a pintle-mounted heavy stubbard, rough terrain modifications, track guards, a searchlight, and even a smoke launcher. The Shadow Sword Super Heavy Tank was originally created sometime during the Dark Age of technology. It was intended to add overwhelming and efficient firepower to any army. It was one of the most potent armored destroyers in the arsenals of the Imperial Army during the Great Crusade. Its terrifying reputation was quickly instilled on the enemies of mankind, but as the unification of humanity spread throughout the galaxy, This super heavy tank became a simple propaganda tool for the expeditionary fleets of the Crusade, as the Imperium rarely confronted an enemy that required the armor-piercing power of the Shadow Sword. It wasn't until the eruption of the galactic civil war known as the Horus Heresy that the Shadow Sword finally came into prominence, as both the Loyalist and traitor forces regularly battled Titans, Knights, Siege Automatons, and other super-armored units. As a result, many Solar Auxilia cohorts quickly integrated the Shadow Sword into their tactical reserves to confront these growing threats. On the battlefield, the Shadow Sword's sole and unique role was a Titan killer. Its volcano cannon was able to bring down Warlord Titans in one fell shot if the Titan's void shields failed to dissipate the blast. This capacity of sheer destruction made the Shadow Sword a welcome addition to the Imperial Guard's vehicle pool, for it allowed the soldiers of the Imperium to engage enemy Titans without the support of the Adeptus Mechanicus Titan legions. If no enemy Titans were present, the Shadow Sword was sometimes deployed as a siege tank, obliterating enemy fortifications at long range, or as a support heavy armored hunter. The sheer capacity of devastation of its volcano cannon was often enough to demoralize and put en route those enemies of mankind who actually cared about their survival. But unlike its sister tank, the Baneblade, the Imperial Guard commanders were loath to field these rare and precious Shadow Swords in any other role than a Titan hunter. This reluctance stems from the fact that for all of the devastating might of the volcano cannon, the Shadow Sword's drawback almost always overshadows the potential advantage of fielding it, except when it's hunting Titans. The volcano cannon was first designed as a Titan-grade weapon, and it was fitted to a battle Titan. The power required to fire comes directly from the God Machine's plasma reactor. Instilling a plasma reactor into a super heavy tank's chassis had always proved impossible for safety reasons. Hence, the Mechanicus devised a power-converting system, which allows the weapon to draw the necessary power from the tank's engine by increments, and build it up in a set of capacitors until the charge was high enough to fire the volcano cannon. The system proved efficient, but it imposed several limitations on the Shadow Sword. In a combat situation, the tank's engine must simultaneously propel the tank and charge the gargantuan volcano cannon capacitors. This results in the Shadow Sword maintaining an extremely low maximum speed, forcing the tank to lumber forward slowly, meter by meter. And even with the majority of the engine's energy output going towards charging the capacitors, the volcano cannon itself had a low rate of fire at less than 1 shot per minute, and had almost no traverse in its fixing settings, requiring the tank to be bodily aimed at the target. Worse still, the engine of the Shadow Sword had to be stopped before firing the volcano cannon in order to prevent any feedback from the capacitors, which had the potential for catastrophic results. This made any form of dynamic targeting impossible, and leaves the Shadow Sword a sitting duck, highly vulnerable to air assault and counter-battery fire for long moments, as it must restart its engine and start lumbering forward again. Additionally, the energy demands of the volcano cannon were so voracious that the Shadow Sword's secondary armament was reduced to a 2 twin-link heavy bolter system. It was inadequate to fend off any form of concentrated assault. All of these drawbacks meant that in the absence of sufficient large and potent targets, the Shadow Sword will remain in reserves and out of harm's way, carefully tended to by the tech priests and engine seers for those moments when its extraordinary firepower was truly required. In the current millennium, the Shadow Sword has become a relic. Few working tanks exist, as the complexity of the main weapon and the capacitor's function was lost or forgotten, and the vehicles simply were lost to disrepair. On the rare occasion where an Imperial Guard regiment is lucky enough to have a surviving and working Shadow Sword, a tank formation was designed to support this single operating Titan killer. Known as the Shadow Sword Domination Force, this formation embodies the application of naval tactics, and it is used when fighting across open, flat deserts and wastes. The unit is centered upon a single Shadow Sword, which is the primary command platform of the whole force. Formed up around the Shadow Sword in such a manner as to protect and support it is the second echelon, consisting of escorting Leman Russ battle tanks. Further out, forming a protective screen around the large vehicle, are a number of Sentinel Scout Walkers. The force is able to dominate a large region of a war zone, for it is able to launch fearsome, mobile attacks and is a very difficult target for most foes to engage. To attack the Shadow Sword itself, an enemy must first break through the expendable Sentinel screen, as well as the battle tank escorts. Many of these domination forces field the support echelons of Hydra flank tanks. These are able to protect against aerial attack, and some even have a wing of Chimera-mounted infantry, who specialize in actions against enemy vehicles and infantry. This formation was made popular during the Age of Apostasy in the early 30th millennium, and most regiments still claim to be able to feel the Shadow Sword domination force. Whether this is true or propaganda, no one can really be sure. And those were 40 facts on the tanks of the 30K era. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys play the tabletop, then you know the struggle of learning the lore about these badass tanks and then realizing that Forge World prices are double what GW has. And these guys are super expensive, and I live in the US, so to get that Forge World model, like, shipping is crazy, if it's even possible right now because of everything that's going on with the pandemic. But these relics of the 30K era look amazing, and it would be awesome to field for like a modern 42nd Millennium army, so like the Imperial Guard or even the Space Marines, but they're just so expensive and it sucks. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys have suggestions for any other topics, please let me know what they are in the comment section below. I missed a lot of tanks, so if you have a specific tank that you want me to talk about, let me know what it is. And thank you guys so much for listening. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. This was Gershwin with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Oh, I used to put my